So the recording has started. John, if you want to share that PowerPoint, we can get that started. Again, my name is Benji Cohn, the Mentor Network Coordinator at the DNR. This is our 40th MOS webinar series, and today I got a couple of great guests that are going to join us and talk about fur bearer trapping. So one of those activities that has a long history in all across the United States and Minnesota in particular. We were kind of instrumental. I was just talking to somebody about the John Bear Grease sled dog race, and I know that started as a mail route, but a lot of fur traders up in that area too that used those sled dog trails. So we have some great topics coming up. Obviously, we got trapping today, high school clay target program tomorrow or next week. When we move into 2022, we got ice angling for panfish. Scott McIntoon is going to join us again for that one. Some dark house spearing, winter squirrel hunting, and the list goes on and on. So if you can join us again. We can go to the next slide. And with that, I'd like to introduce our guests for today, Brittany and John. Brittany, you want to start out and just introduce yourself and say hi to everybody?
Beginning tapping. Oh,
you're good. I just unmuted you.
Oh, okay. I'm Brittany. I have been trapping by myself for 4 years now, but I originally got into it with my dad, who brought me out when I was probably 3 years old. I didn't really pay too much attention to all the specifics, but a couple of years ago, I thought it'd be fun to get out with my kids and kind of introduce them to it too and give us something fun to do together.
I'm John Erb. I am the fur bearer research biologist for the Minnesota DNR. I've also been trapping for about 40 years now. Not sure really what got me into it. I didn't have any family members who were trappers themselves. Still to this day, I have 3 brothers, but I'm the only one that ever got into trapping. Certainly have some hunters in my family, but I think trapping is something that I read a book when I was young in high school, and we happened to have a local fur buyer. And between those two things, I became really curious about trapping and these critters and exploring nature and while pursuing them, and became a lifelong passion and probably what led me to become a research biologist.
That's awesome. Thanks again for both of you for joining us today. And just a little bit about myself. I started trapping when I was probably 14 or 15 years old through a program down in Red Wing, Minnesota. So I actually ended up borrowing some traps and got into it a little bit, and made enough to pay for a good chunk of my first year books and stuff in college, and then I ended up moving out of state. So, but I haven't really kept traps since. So it's one of those things that interests me, and I might think about starting up again. But I really appreciate you guys joining us today. So with that, I think, John, we'll start the PowerPoint presentation. Anybody, if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A section. Brittany's here to help us answer some of those during the presentation, and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So.
Yeah, thanks, Benji. I appreciate folks' interest in this topic. As I said before, it was something that really piqued my curiosity as a youngster and just led to a lifelong interest in nature and wildlife. This group of species we call fur bearers, both trapping them, but also following their tracks and photographing them and researching them. So it's been a lifelong passion for me, and glad to share some of my thoughts and experiences with trapping. One of the things I got to get used to switching the slides here a different way. One of the things you'll see as we go through this presentation is that there is a lot of complexity or diversity in trapping because there are so many different species. There are a variety of trap types. Each may have different regulations, and so as you'll get a sense as we're going through this, it is complex. But I encourage you to kind of focus on the smaller details. Trapping can be as simple or as big and complex as you want it to be. You can choose to trap one species only. You can try and pursue trapping a variety of species. So it's not necessarily as complex as all these slides might make it out to be. You can start small and build big. Fur bearers is just a term we use to kind of lump a lot of these species that have some history with harvest being motivated by the pursuit of fur, use of fur in various products. Obviously, these species, though, have very diverse roles and values in society and ecosystems. Many of them are predators that consume other species. Many are prey. Some are both. Some like beaver have notable effects on habitat. They're valuable to humans both in a consumptive and non-consumptive sense. Excuse me. People enjoy photographing a variety of fur bearers, harvesting, following their tracks. So a lot of different values to humans. And of course, they just have intrinsic value as a part of nature. In Minnesota, we have probably 20 different species that might be considered fur bearers. This slide just lists all of the species that you generally can harvest through trapping in Minnesota. I have wolf on this list. They're not currently a harvest season on wolves, but there has been in the past. But you know, close to 20 species covering a variety of different groups of animals, the weasel family, the canid family, you know, so a lot of diversity, which Minnesota probably has more diverse opportunities for trapping than 98% of the rest of the states. You know, Maine and a few other northern states have maybe the same type of diversity with fishers and martens and bobcats and so on, but a lot of diverse options here in Minnesota. Why do trappers enjoy trapping? Well, it differs for every one of us, but we've done a lot of surveys, national surveys over the year to try and understand trappers' motivations, and this is just a list of some of the common ones that trappers talk about. Of course, you know, making some money off fur is commonly thought of as being the primary reason people trap, and I can assure you that is a reason some trap, but rarely is it the primary motivation. It just like with hunting or anything else outdoors, it's part of a lifestyle, rural lifestyle, nature interaction, experience outdoor recreation with family and so on. So there's a lot of benefits, personal benefits that come from trapping. And I know this is true for me. If I was trapping simply for money, maybe I wouldn't have continued trapping. I enjoy it for a whole lot of these different reasons. There are a variety of uses for products that come from harvested fur bearers. Obviously, the fur is a big part of that, whether it be making hats, gloves, accessories, or full length fur coats. But there are also other markets for various glands and products of animals. Beaver castor is used in making various scents and perfumes. That used to be something that an extract was put as an additive in ice cream even. But you can see mink oil, fur is used in some fine products like paint brushes and fishing lures. Skulls can be sold to various educational institutions that want them or individuals. So there is a diverse array of markets, and the sky's the limit as far as your imagination goes. Another use for pelts is in education. We use a lot in DNR, and trapping groups also provide collections of furs to school science classes and so on. So taxidermy and education and things like that is another end product or end use for these products. Besides the benefits that individuals may derive from trapping, I like to mention that, you know, DNR or conservation also benefits in many ways. And I'm not going to go into detail on these, but traps either used by state agency biologists or trappers who are collaborating with biologists are used to monitor fur bearer populations, to manage populations. Many species have been restored. Lynx and wolves and otters and even beavers and fishers and martens have been captured by trappers and reintroduced in areas that they had become absent from. And so a lot of different ways that we as an agency benefit or use traps as well. This just shows some examples from our DNR research. We use pretty much all the different types of trap types. You can see a martin being released with a radio collar. We catch those in cage traps. A bobcat caught in a foothold trap that was radio collared and released for a study. You may not be able to see it, but the bottom right is a wolf that's being restrained in a cable restraint or a type of a snare. This wolf was then radio collared and released. And sometimes traps are used to remove problem animals, kill traps, so beaver that may be flooding an area or causing problems. So all trap types are of benefit and use to us in DNR as well as to individual trappers. As far as education and regulations, if you're under the age of 13, there are no licenses required to trap. There are some exceptions in that if you are between the ages of 5 and 13 and want to harvest or register some of our limited quota species like fishers, martins, and otters, you at least have to get free site tags for those, but no actual license required. If you're born after December 31st, 1989, you do have to, and you hadn't taken or hadn't purchased a trapping license in a year prior to that, you do have to take a trapper education course once you reach the age where a license is required, that being the age of 13. That course is taught by the Minnesota Trappers Association, and you can visit their website to get more information about trying to get signed up for that. Once you hit the age of 13, some type of a license is required. We won't go into all the details there right now. There are a lot of different regulations based on species and where you are in the state. Again, we can't go through every detail, but in terms of season lengths, the extremes would be species like coyote and striped skunks. There actually is no closed season. They can be harvested year round. And obviously, most trappers who are pursuing them for some type of fur value are only pursuing them during the fall and winter, but technically they can be harvested year round. That stems from problems, some historical problems and nuisance situations, and they wanted to make it easier to deal with those situations. The other extreme would be fishers and martins. The trapping season is only 9 days long right now in mid to late December, just ended here a few days ago. And you can only catch 2 of them in total. So 2 fishers, 2 martins, or 1 of each. So some very liberal seasons for some species and others very, very conservative limited seasons. There are different regulations that may depend on where you are in the state. A north-south zones just determines when the actual season opens for some of the species. Some regulations like on snares differ in the farmland versus the forest and so on. So again, we can take some of the questions at the end if you want more information on these, but it's important to know that the seasons vary by species and there can be different regulations based on where you are in the state. And it's good to look closely at those. As far as the various types of traps that are out there, there are probably four or five main categories. The ones you see in the top right, probably the 4 top ones, all fit into some category of being a foot restraining or foothold type trap. Some have long springs, some are coil springs, but they all are designed to catch an animal and hold it by the foot. And then a trapper, when they arrive, would have to dispatch the animal. Cage trap in the middle there can be used on a wide variety of species. The next one on the right is called a body grip trap. They are designed to kill animals quickly, humanely. Animals go through the trap and releases the trigger, and I'll show you some additional pictures later. But they are exclusively intended as a killing trap. Then there's the snare or cable restraint. Depending upon how and where you set it and some of the mechanical components, these can be used to live restrain an animal or to kill it. regardless of the type of trap you might be using, all traps, unless you're on your own, trapping on your own land, you do have to have tags attached to those that show either your license number. I list there the options you can put on it, but they do have to have tags identifying that they are your traps. You can see on the graph on the left that as far as most commonly used traps, when you're thinking about all species, most trappers report using some type of foothold trap in their trapping. Body grip traps, about 60% of trappers report using them for one or more species. Snares or cable restraints, only about a quarter report using those. So most trappers use some of all categories, but clearly some are more commonly used than others. You can see here the diversity just in foothold traps. We won't go into all the details, but they come in a lot of different jaw types that are designed to be reduce injury and be more humane for different species. Some can have rubber pads on the traps. Some have thicker jaws and so on. And they are most commonly used for the canid species, wolves, foxes, coyotes, bobcats as well. But you can see there's some use of those traps for pretty much all fur bearers out there. They can be set on land. When they're set on land, they're usually buried in dirt and covered then with some type of bait or lure placed in front of where the animal is approaching to investigate and then steps on the pan. They can be set in the water, as you can see in some of these other things, say for beavers or muskrats, and a lot of different options. There are a variety of accessories that typically go when you're using foothold traps. When setting on land, you get various types of tools for digging out the place that you'll put the trap, dirt sifters for sifting dirt back over it to camouflage it. You usually have to cover the pan of the trap with something you see in the top right photo. Lots of options there so that the dirt doesn't go under it. So when an animal steps on it, the pan can go down and trigger the trap. A variety of different setters if you're younger and hands aren't as strong, or older and hands are not as strong as they used to be. There's a variety of setters that can help set these traps. So these are just some common accessories that are used for these types of traps. Regulations that are specific to footholds. There are some different ones in the far northeastern part of the state in what we call our link zone. And I won't go into each detail, but as far as statewide, the primary regulations we have on these is that the jaw spread when set can be no more than 8 3/4 inches wide. The other one is that no bait can be set within 20 feet of those traps that can be seen from above. And this is designed to eliminate concerns about a raptor or a bird that might see bait from above and land near the trap. So generally, these types of foothold traps have to be checked at least once every day. The exceptions are if they are set in a way that keeps the animal underwater or under ice. Then they need to be checked either every third day, or if under ice, there is no specific requirement for when you check them. Cable restraints or snares, as I said, depending upon the type of mechanical components you put on them. You can see a couple of these insets pictures in this slide showing a variety of different types of locks and other devices. So depending upon where you set them and how you configure them mechanically, they can be used to hold animals alive or kill animals. Most commonly used for some of the canids, again, coyotes, red foxes, wolves, but can be used on just about any species. As you saw from an earlier slide, there aren't as many trappers who use these compared to foothold traps and body grip traps, but they are an important tool to many trappers for certain species. They are generally placed above trails or on trails that animals are naturally traveling. You can see in the bottom right here that they can be set in the water, half underwater, completely underwater, say for a beaver. They can be set on under the ice, attached to a bait pole, as you see in the bottom left photo, that might be lowered under the water, and a beaver sees this stick that looks like food and swims up and is caught. They can be set on land on a natural trail animals are using, or on top left photo is just a man-made example where somebody kind of made a little tunnel that animals might run through. There aren't as many accessories that you might need for these. Usually there's some type of a wire or pole that's used to suspend the snare over the trail that you're trying to have that the animal is traveling down, various types of other extensions and connectors that you might use, but not a lot of other accessories. Regulations can vary depending upon where you are in the state with these. Again, we won't go into each zone specific detail, but the ones that apply statewide is that snares have to have certain devices on them such that should a larger animal accidentally get captured, say a deer or an elk or something, they're able to free themselves. These are called breakaway devices. And there's regulations on how big of loops you can have those snares set in and how far off the ground. Again, they have to be checked every day unless they are set in a manner that keeps the animal underwater or under ice. Cage traps, pretty straightforward. Most people have a basic understanding of these, but there are a lot of shapes and sizes. You can see the bottom right photo is one that's a suitcase style that's used for beaver. Generally, trappers don't use these a lot. They're used more in nuisance animal control businesses and other we use them in research situations. But they do come in a lot of styles with single door traps, double doors, tall ones, short ones, and so on. So they are effective on a wide variety of species. They just tend to cost a little more and a little more bulky to transport around. So although very effective, not as much use by trappers. But in the right situation, they're fantastic devices for capturing animals. You can see here, not as many species are they used for. It's very unlikely you'll ever catch a canid, a fox, a coyote, a wolf, things like that in cage traps. Most other species, it's possible, but they're most commonly used for some of the medium-sized animals like raccoons, skunks, possums, and so on. There really aren't any specific regulations on where or how you can set these. They do have to be checked every day. The exception would be there are certain versions of them that are set underwater that just have one-way swinging doors for muskrats that you set underwater in a trail they're swimming through. These, since they're underwater, would have to be checked every third calendar day. Body grip traps, killing traps, you can see they come in a wide variety of sizes. The very top right photos show you that there's also other ways that traps, a standard rat trap is commonly used to capture weasels. And you can see the other photo on the top right is actually a foothold trap, but when set inside of a small box, it acts as a killing trap on a smaller animal like a weasel. But for the most part, body gripping or killing traps, we're talking about these traps in the middle, these square rectangle traps. There are now some round ones as well. But the idea is that animals travel through them either on a natural trail or inside of some type of a box where an animal is going to get bait. They are very effective on a lot of species. You can see very popular on species that are trapped in the water. Excuse me, I'm getting a little cough here. Very popular with otter, beaver, muskrats, fishers and martins, mink, but there are very few species you can't use them on. Like with cage traps, they aren't very effective for trying to catch things like foxes, coyotes, or wolves. They can be set, or excuse me, this just shows a diagram of typically once they trigger the trap, they can catch animals with a single strike or double strike and result in a pretty rapid death. They can be set inside various types of boxes with bait and lure placed in the back. You can see there's all kinds of configurations trappers might use, including just making a natural cubby out of sticks and pine boughs or something. Some are collapsible, some are simply plastic mailboxes, but a lot of options for how you can deploy them in this manner. They can also be set vertically in trees or on poles that are leaning towards trees. You can see with openings on the top, say raccoons and fishers and martens and other animals may climb. They can be put vertically but on the ground, which makes them a little more selective. Animal has to be able to go under it, turn, and go up. They can also be set just on a pole with bait or something above it, and animals are running up the tree and go through the trap. They can also be set with no bait or lure on natural trails or a log crossing a stream that a raccoon or something else might cross, trails in the grass, and so on. So a lot of different ways they can be set, including under the ice, in natural travel corridors for a beaver, some near the beaver's lodge, near a dam. You can see the one photo with a carrot attached to a trigger for catching muskrats under the ice. So a lot of different ways to set them underwater as well. Not a lot of accessories. The most would fit into these two or three categories of setters. These traps have springs on either end that need to be compressed, and then there's a safety hook that is used to hold the spring compressed while you're setting the rest of the trap. So some type of setter is very important for these, both for setting and as a safety tool. You can, of course, when you set these on a trail, you can use just natural sticks to help support them and stand them upright. But there are now dozens of styles of brackets you can buy that attach to these traps that help them stand upright in the trail that you're setting them on. And then there are some extra safety setters so that after you remove this, the trap is set and the springs are the hooks are removed on the springs, you have another safety that allows you to, if you're doing a last minute adjustment to the trap, you want to make sure that it's not going to trigger. So you remove these other safeties right before you would leave. The regulations are, depends on where you are in the state, but I would loosely summarize them as the very small ones, less than 5-inch, generally can be set without specific restrictions. The largest sizes, greater than 7.5 inches, generally have to be set at least half underwater. And it's the medium-sized ones where there are some more nuanced regulations to try and minimize conflicts or risks to pets that may be traveling in areas on land. So if you're using the middle-sized ones, there are certain caveats to how and where they can be set. And it's important to familiarize yourself with those and simply not use them if there's much in the way of concerns. Well, all traps, regardless of type, usually have to be staked, and so I won't spend much time on here, but there are a variety of, most traps come with some type of a swivel or a staking swivel on the end of it that either a rebar stake is pushed through or they make these cable stakes which you drive into the ground with a driver, and then when it's pulled up it turns and so can't be pulled out of the ground. They're lighter to carry in a pocket. But they can be hard to remove when you're done. But they're very effective in many situations. Rarely, but sometimes traps are not staked, but they're attached to what's called a drag you see in the bottom left. Animal gets caught, is able to get away from where the trap was set into the brush further, gets tangled up, and then the trapper locates the animal. Most of the time, trappers don't use these. We use these actually when we're live trapping wolves for research, where we set traps on a trail, but then the wolf can get off the trail once he's captured. A lot of different general trapping supplies. Baits, lures, we're not going to go into all these. If you're trapping the water species, hip boots, waders, gloves, a variety of pack baskets for carrying supplies, and so on. Traps typically have to be prepared in one fashion or another, especially foothold traps and the body grip traps. Cage traps and snares generally aren't treated or painted or camouflaged in any way, though they can be. But the process for these other traps is usually cleaning them, using one of numerous formulas for staining or dyeing the traps, or they can just be painted as well. Put a tag, your name tags on the traps, and then final adjustments. So there is some preparation involved for some of these trap types. Of course, once you catch something, it's important to think about what am I going to do? We mentioned before there's a variety of different options for marketing and using these, but once you've got something, now what? You can obviously keep the animal, the fur, the carcass for any type of personal use. You know, some people feed their sled dogs beaver carcasses. I know somebody that actually makes dog treats out of dried beaver meat and so on. You can make your own crafts and so on. But typically, a lot of trappers are selling the pelts, and so a whole animal or an untanned pelt can only be sold to a licensed fur buyer. Once it's tanned, so if you just send it somewhere to be tanned and now it's tanned, now you can sell it to anybody. You could sell it on eBay or wherever. As far as finding a buyer, if you're selling it untanned, there are sometimes local buyers. There are ones that travel around at Trappers Association meetings or travel to different towns and pick up fur on different days. So it's important to ask some questions about where there might be a buyer in your area. As I said, you can sell tan pelts to anybody. You can also sell the bones, skulls, teeth, claws, and hides of fur bearers. And you can sell the flesh of beaver, muskrat, and raccoon. Processing your own fur, so from whole animal to finished if you need to do that. Again, some people will buy them whole. You may get less money when it's whole, but if you want to completely process your own fur, that's another step in the game. And I encourage you to there are now so many options for books and DVDs and YouTube videos and attending trapping conventions and so on to learn how to do this. There are some people that even do this the custom process, so you would take it and they would do this work and charge you say $2 or $3 for a raccoon pelt, and then they give it back to you after it's processed. But you can see there's a variety of equipment that you might need if you're going to do this yourself. But it's a three-step process that usually involves, after skinning the animal, you have to remove some of the fat and meat from the hide, and then it's put on some type of a stretcher that you see in the bottom right, wood or wire frame, to let it dry, and then it can be stored for a lot longer time. So how do I learn how to do all of this? Obviously, as I said, lots of different species, variety of trap types. Everyone, you know, has different nuances and methods. So there is probably more information available now than there has ever been to learn how to trap. When I began trapping, there was some information. Trappers used to be real secretive and not want to share their tips and advice. Now you can't go to a convention or look in a trapping supply catalog and not find dozens, if not hundreds, of books and videos and trapping conventions in the summer. There's one here in Minnesota, or one or two. Lots of trapping magazines, some that come as being a member of the Minnesota or National Trappers Associations. There's others that you can just go online and order. Very good magazines to teach you how to trap and how to process fur and so on. So I encourage you to utilize all these if you want to explore more, and certainly wish you the best in your pursuit if you take it up. And I'll pass it back now to Benji if he wants to manage any
Sure.
questions.
Yeah, thanks so much for there's a ton of information about trapping. It is, like you said, it's one of the most regulated forms of activities out there in hunting, I think, for and for taking animals. So we had a fair number of questions come in, and one thing I really wanted to point out, maybe you want to touch on real quick, Brittany or John too, is the way trappers, especially with the education courses. When I started trapping, we didn't have that. I learned from a friend to do that. Um, but setting traps, you're going out there and you're targeting generally a specific animal. Um, the likelihood, doing the best you can to not, inflict injury or harm on something you're not targeting. So if you're out trapping fox, you're going to specifically try to set your traps to catch a fox, not catch some other critter that's out there. So um, I don't know if any of you want to touch on that, but I think specifically trappers are pretty good about that. I think one time I caught a coon in a fox trap that had set, but that was about it. I've never. There was a question about accidentally catching a bird or a rabbit or a squirrel or something like that. So
Yeah, I could just mention something. You're right. Many trappers, when you're pursuing something, you're oftentimes intentionally trying to catch multiple species. So if I set a trap for a raccoon along the water's edge, I know I'm also likely to catch a mink or maybe even a muskrat. Same with I'm setting a coyote trap, there's a pretty good chance I could catch a bobcat if you're up north, or a fox or something else. But it's in general, if you look at the group of fur bearers together, legal fur bearers to harvest, traps are very selective. We worked on a 20-year national research project on trapping. Worked with trappers all across the country, with U.S. and Canadian researchers. Thousands and thousands of animals captured, and it was rare for something other than a fur bearer to be captured in a trap. The squirrels and rabbits were two that occasionally were caught, probably the more common ones of what you might think of as non-fur bearer. Some people might say they're fur bearers because you can also use the hide of a squirrel or a rabbit, but very selective. Trapping is very selective in terms of capturing legally harvestable animals. As with anything, occasionally, sometimes something bad can happen. For a dog could get caught. Something else, that was not supposed to be captured can happen, but it is very, very rare when you look at the number of hours and traps set on the landscapes. Very rare.
great, and I really like the presentation, at the end about how do you preserve your hides and what do you do then. And I know I wanted to call on Brittany and show when I was trapping, the fur price wasn't great, but we didn't have a whole lot of other stuff to do. I got some mucklucks I made out of uh, some deer and hide stuff, and a pair of mittens I made out of a beaver pelt. But there's not a whole lot that I did with it other than sell it. So, Brittany, if you want to share some of the things that you've discovered with the skulls and the fur stuff that you've made, that'd be great.
So recently, a lot of women like gnomes. And so this little guy has made um, the pom pom and the beard is beaver. I've done them in coyote, and then I've done these little headbands, and these little things are made out of muskrat. And then my little girls have their own little choppers that are made out of beaver. Um, I've, I don't know, I guess I've made quite a few little just like garments and stuff that I do sell some of them I keep them, but yeah, right now the fur prices are unfortunately quite low. So I found other ways that I can make a little money off of them.
It's great, and honestly there's a reason for thousands of years people have wore hide and fur because it is extremely warm.
It
So,
is.
and what were you talking about? I coming from the deer hunting world more. A lot of people do the Euro mounts, and you were talking about a lady that was gathering carcasses from you after the if you flesh it out and tan the hide and stuff. But she was gathering the rest of it for.
Yep, she is a bone taxidermist. And so she'll take whether it's just the teeth or the skull, and she has it all professionally cleaned out, and then she'll actually go on Etsy and sell them herself. So I only use mainly the furs, and then I will keep the beaver meat. But as far as the bodies go, I didn't really have any use for myself, so she'll take them, and she's made, I know, jewelry from them, and then she's even taken the full bodies and just taken the whole thing and put them back together after she's cleaned them all out. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of uses. I think historically, most of the animals were used completely. It's good to hear that a lot of people are still doing stuff like that. I know we had a couple of questions on the regulations side on the trapping licenses. I put a note in there that I believe, and John, correct me if I'm wrong, but for an adult trapping license, and it's only Minnesota residents that can trap in Minnesota. Me being an out-of-state license, I can't come in Minnesota and trap. It's a $23 trapping license for an adult, and you do have to have a small game license along with that, and that's another $22. So I know you touched on the presentation about there's different fees for youth and the tagging for kids that are younger than that. I know Brittany brought up an experience with her daughter that she was young enough not to need a license, but still had to have a tag for specific animals that get tagged. So
Yeah, there are some caveats on the licenses. Generally, you have to be a resident to trap in Minnesota. But if you're a non-resident landowner, you can trap on your land. So somebody who lives in Wisconsin that owns some land in Minnesota could trap. There are also some exceptions in when you need that small game license um, to go along with the trapping license. And I'm drawing a blank now. I forget what the exceptions are, but not everybody. It may be that again, if you're trapping on your own land, you have to have the trapping license, but maybe not the small game license. I apologize for not being certain on that right now, but and yeah, with some of these limited species where we only allow you, like if you trap bobcats, you can only catch 5. Otter, you can only catch 4, and fisher and martin, it's 2 in combination. But for fisher, martin, and otter, you do have to not only do you have to get an extra tag in advance, it's free, but you have to notch that tag like with deer. With the day you trap an otter, you have to notch the tag saying, I caught this otter on this day. Those tags can be obtained from the licensed ELS license centers. Usually they ask you if you buy a trapping license, do you want fisher, martin, or otter tags? But then those 3 species plus, excuse me, plus bobcats, you need to be aware that you have to also bring those in to be tagged no later than 48 hours after the close of those seasons. Those are species we pay more attention to monitoring the harvest, and so we collect heads to do aging from the teeth. We collect whole bobcat carcasses to get reproductive information to help us understand and manage the species. So there are some extra things you need to do and be aware of if you're going to trap fisher, martin, bobcat, and otter.
great, thanks. And bottom line is look at the regulations book, read it over if you're interested in this, and if you do have any questions, reach out to the DNR conservation officer, the information center, or John, and it'd be good resources to help you out. Chris asked a couple questions on there. One was about squirrel or rabbit as fur bearers. I don't know anybody that's actually tried to trap squirrel, been hunting them. Rabbits, I've seen traps for, but one of the other questions was why would you choose a live trap versus a kill trap? And I don't know if you want to touch on that a little bit.
Sure, I can offer some my thoughts, and if Brittany has any, she can add them as well. Sometimes it just depends on whether you can catch an animal, how easily you can catch it in a quick kill trap. For example, I mentioned the body grip traps. It is very, very difficult to catch a fox, coyote, wolf, the canids in those. So very difficult to even catch one in that type of trap. So you may have to use more of a live restraining trap. There's other situations based on potential risk. If it's an area where there's even a slight concern that maybe somebody might show up, a grouse hunter or whatever it might be with a dog, that you maybe don't want to use the quick kill traps in those areas. You would rather use a foothold trap that live restrains, or a cable a version of a snare that's a cable restraint. So if they're caught, they're less likely to have any concern with the animal. So sometimes it's about safety, with minimizing conflict with another user group. Sometimes it's simply there's only one trap that works well for a species, and so on. But in either case, you're still going to be typically dispatching the animal. It's just whether the trap itself does it, or whether it's restrained in a live trap and then the trapper has to approach the animal and usually dispatch it with a firearm, unless it's an animal you're intending to release.
Great. We're getting a lot of questions coming in now, so we'll see if we can get through all these. Now that there's Scott was wondering, now that there's 3 feet of snow, he must live up north of the metro area. What's the best method for fox? You have any suggestions on how to improve his fox harvest?
I'm trying to figure that out for myself. No, I certainly do believe that, you know, when you get these deep snows, that's one area where the snares or cable restraints are sometimes superior, easier to keep them functioning once animals start creating and using trails. So some trappers, if it's the right area, will place baits and lures out to get animals coming to those areas. Maybe you've caught a couple beaver and you take the beaver carcasses out. Fox and coyotes and other things show up, and then you set snares on trails that you're certain that the fox or the coyotes or whatever you're pursuing or traveling down. But it just can be tough. Northern Minnesota winter trapping, is difficult when you can't use footholds as well, or some people used to use foothold traps and just bury them in the snow like you do in the dirt. I think that's kind of a lost art amongst trappers nowadays, still commonly used in Alaska and some places. But I do think when you get deep snows, trying to become more proficient at the use of snares or cable restraints around baited areas, bait sites, is a good way to go.
Great. Trying to keep track of all the questions here. Brittany, you're from kind of the metro area up there. We had a couple of questions on where to go hunt. I think we put a link in the chat on some resources that the DNR page has. Do you have any suggestions, around the metro area? And if you own property, John might want to touch on that too. If you do own property, what are the processes can you trap on your own land, even if it is in the metro area?
As far as on your own land in the metro, I guess I'm right in town, so I'm not exactly sure. But I personally will go and try and work with the DNR, and I go on the WMAs, because then I know I don't have to worry about any rules and regulations. If there still is, you can go hunting on there, but if you want to go for otter and beaver, you do need permission, and they'll give you a written paper for WMAs. So I really like that just because I know that I'm the only one. They only allow one person at a time, at least where I'm located. So it's just nice to know that I won't have to run into any other trappers. And I know I've been doing the same ones for a couple years, so I know just how many have been taken.
And Rachel had another question while you're talking, Brittany, that you might be able to help on. Are there any resources for how to make garments out of furs?
I guess I need more of a specific on exactly what you mean by resources.
I was just
don't
thinking,
know.
like, I know Lure of the North, I think it is. It's a Canadian company, but they do like make at home kits for mittens and stuff that might have patterns and stuff. If you do have your own hides and stuff, they might
Yeah.
be able to help you out.
I mean, yeah, if she's looking for patterns, Etsy has patterns for absolutely everything. Um, I know like my dad makes a lot of the gloves, and he'll just take an old glove and just completely take it apart and use that because he knows exactly what the size is going to be.
So my daughter just did. She made me a pair of mittens for Christmas this year. So
I
uh,
did see one of the questions it was on average, how often do you catch something? He says that he has a cabin and he only goes there for 2 or 3 days. And if it'd be pointless to even set traps, but if you know that the animals are there, um, in my experience, those first 2, 3 days are the best days. I mean, if you know they're there and you set the traps, you're gonna get them. And so I would say 2 or 3 days is a perfect amount of time. I go to my dad's up north and I only stay the weekend and I'll set a couple traps. And if I know I'm the only one there and it's on our land, I know it is worth the time generally.
Yeah, and I would add it can vary by the species, and how big of territories they cover. A weasel that's living in the woodpile by the plate, well, he's probably going to be around there and easier to catch quickly. A coyote that might cover 6, 7 miles in its territory, the diameter of its territory. The few days you're there, he might be over hunting rabbits on the other side. So sometimes if you can, place any types of attractants or baits out when you're not there, animals are more apt to be around when you do come back. So those types of tricks can make it um, more productive. And species like beaver, which if you have a beaver house or a beaver dam, that's a very focal point that's easier to trap. Conversely, again, a fox or a coyote, which might cover several miles and doesn't have just one home site, if you will, they can be a little more challenging to try and catch quickly in a day or two.
great. I know I think it was Brad that asked another question about starting. What's a good time to start? I know the trapping season just didn't start. We're getting towards the end of it, but uh, any tips or tricks on when's a good time to get out and start trapping if you're interested in it?
Well, beaver does go till May, but if it's your very first time, you're gonna have to do under the ice, which is not easy, at least. I mean, you're gonna constantly have to dig through that ice, but spring is coming around, so you could definitely get started with beaver for spring.
Yeah, I
Great.
think it's all, weather is a big unknown with trapping. In the many trapping seasons open in the middle of October, some not for several weeks later. And you can have several really nice weeks of fall weather for trapping, especially if you're more in southern Minnesota than up north. But another year, it might be really cold and we get a foot of snow. So it can just be challenging. Um, Later in the year when there's snow, you get to see more animal tracks. Sometimes it's easier to know what's where, but it can be more challenging weather conditions with the cold. So I think I always encourage people to try and start small, either early, as early as you can. Try some muskrat trapping or a raccoon trapping early in the season when it's not as cold and you're not, you know, it's never fun to start trying something new and being really cold right in the beginning. So get out right away and maybe pursue some a raccoon or weasel or muskrat, some of the smaller species. Like Brittany said, the spring, our beaver trapping season does go long until middle of May, I believe, and that can be an enjoyable time to try beaver trapping in particular as well when it's starting to warm up and the ice is melting and uh,
Yeah.
so.
Brad's got a few questions in here, and Brad, I'm sorry if we don't get to them. Please reach out to myself or John, and we'll do our best to respond back to you if we don't get to them. But he had a question about foreign or human scent and how much of a concern that is, and he was also looking for a contact for a good trapper to come and do some private land control. I thought Minnesota Trappers Association, but I don't know if either of you have a suggestion for that or want to volunteer. I don't know where Brad lives. Maybe he lives next to you.
Yeah, I think some states do a little better job of keeping a database of trappers' names who are willing to come address problem situations, whether it's a beaver flooding the driveway or a concern about fox in the chicken pen or coyotes. But what I would probably suggest is, yeah, you could either some of the Trappers Association, Minnesota Trappers Association has districts, and they have district directors, different parts of the state, and you can probably find a contact there that would just say, "Hey, looking for a trapper near Wadena. Do you know of any?" Conversely, you can contact the local DNR area wildlife management office. I'm not sure where you're at, but we have our wildlife offices scattered around the state, and they usually maintain names of trappers because our offices get a lot of those calls as well. I've got this beaver flooding my driveway, or I've got raccoons in my sweet corn patch, or whatever it is. So contact local DNR wildlife office or one of the Minnesota Trappers Association district directors may be able to help locate somebody.
Great.
And as
I
far
Do you
as
want to?
scent goes, I
Oh,
know you said about scent. I don't do a whole lot of predator trapping, but you definitely do need scent control. Some people will even go as far as wearing, gloves so you can't smell anything. My dad doesn't do that and has no problem. But as far as beaver, raccoon, muskrat, otter, I have never bothered with any of my own scent, and I've had no issues catching anything.
great. I was also going to ask you on Bill asked a question about tanning hides. Do you tan your own or do you send them? I know you've touched a little bit on you tan a lot of your own hides, but I know we used to send stuff to Uber Glove down in Owatonna, and I'm not for sure they're around anymore, but
There
resources
is
for hide, hides.
I do my own with my dad. There is the Duluth one, and then there's one it's called Mink and Moyle, and I believe that's in Iowa. I've heard that one's really, really good. I haven't heard the best reviews about Duluth, just as far as what you send, you might not get your own back. But I've never personally used them, so.
We get
Yeah,
one last.
I've tanned a little on my own, and I've also sent a fair bit of stuff off to Moyles, and it's in Idaho actually.
Oh,
What I found is that maybe I don't know how to do it real well myself, but the home tanning kits certainly preserve the hide and do a good job. But it can be really challenging to try and get something that is as supple and flexible as a professionally tanned one. It may reflect that I'm not doing it correctly, but I often find it's worth sometimes to send it off to a professional tannery to get high quality, unless you really want to spend the time to get good at it yourself. But a typical animal can be tanned for anywhere from $8-10 up to 25-40 bucks, depending upon the size of the animal. So it's not real expensive to tan something, especially if you're just wanting to make, you want two beaver pelts because you're going to make a pair of gloves or something. That might cost you $30 to get two beavers tanned or something, depending upon the size.
Great. Well, again, we're just ran out of time. It's 1 o'clock now. I want to thank both of you for joining us today and get a great turnout today. A lot of questions. I'm going to kind of leave with one question. Eric um, asked in here. His thoughts on fur prices coming back up. He has a good friend he's gone out with a few times. He seems like it's an incredible amount of work for very little return in the money. And John, you touched on this in your presentation a little bit. Brittany touched on it a little bit. Why do you trap if it's not, like you specifically, if it's not for the money of trapping? Give me one good closing sentence on why you enjoy trapping, and we'll leave it at that.
personally, me, I guess it's just something my family has always done, and I wanted my girls to do it as well. And it gets them outside and not stuck in front of the TV. They learn not just about animals and where they live, but we do simple little things like collecting different kind of leaves. So if we don't get an animal, we get to go home with the leaves and the sticks and do fun little art projects. So they have learned a lot about just everything outdoors just by getting them out trapping.
Great. John?
That is a hard one to put in a sentence or two. It's something that provides all nature recreation for me, provides great, internal satisfaction. And it's not simply did I catch something, but it's all the things I see when I'm trying to the tracks, and why did that mink not go in my trap and went under the ice and came up over, it is the experience of interacting with nature, including harvesting it. And so it's just a part of I guess what the way my mind works, and brings me happiness from nature, from interacting it in both consumptive and non-consumptive ways, and learning about it. And it's just very got a frog in my throat all of a sudden, but just a very personally rewarding, outdoor, challenging, healthy nature experience.
Great. And I think with that, we're going to close up. It's just after 1. Again, thank you so much, Brittany and John, for the great presentation. Thanks everybody in the audience for the great questions. And like both Brittany and John said, it's just something, just being outside has a great calming effect. And it's just a great experience every time I'm outside, no matter if I'm outside just playing on the lake, ice skating, or if we're outside fishing. And we just want to encourage you through these programs to get out there and do those activities. So if you have any other questions or want to get into trapping a little bit more, we put some resource links in the chat. Please do that, and reach out to us if you have any other questions. And thanks again for joining us. We'll talk to you soon. Okay, I'm going to stop this.